He watched her leave the house that night, never imagining she would disappear into shadows that weren't hers. Who was the voice guiding her steps, and what had she gotten herself tangled in? By the time he realized the trap had been set, it wasn't just her life on the line, and the truth waiting in the dark was far more dangerous than anyone could guess. Welcome back to Hidden Truths True Crime Stories. Subscribe and watch full story now. The knock came at 2:14 a.m., sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of the house like a blade. Rowan Hale was already awake. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening as the echo faded. In the darkness, the digital clock glowed red, marking the hour he had rehearsed in his mind more times than he could remember. When the knock came again, Rowan rose calmly. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He slipped his feet into slippers placed neatly beside the bed and straightened the collar of his shirt as if preparing for an expected guest. The hallway lights stayed off as he moved toward the door, counting his steps, breathing evenly. 2 police officers stood on the porch. One was young, his posture stiff with formality. The other, older, watched Rowan with a look sharpened by years of reading faces. Rain clung to their coats, dripping onto the welcome mat Myra had picked out last spring. "Mr. Hale?" the older officer asked. Rowan nodded once. "Yes, we're here about your wife, Myra Calder." The words landed softly, almost politely. Rowan waited a second longer than necessary before responding, letting concern form on his face like something practiced in a mirror. "Is she all right?" The younger officer glanced at his partner. "We're not sure. She was reported missing a few hours ago." Rowan stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Please, come in." Inside, the house was immaculate, no overturned furniture. No signs of panic. The officer's eyes moved instinctively, cataloging what wasn't there. Rowan led them into the living room, where a single lamp cast long shadows across the walls. "When did you last see your wife?" the older officer asked. Rowan folded his hands together, careful to keep them steady. "Yesterday evening, she said she needed air. She does that sometimes. And you didn't try to stop her?" "She's an adult," Rowan replied. "I trust her." The statement sounded reasonable, almost admirable. The older officer studied him more closely now, noticing how controlled his voice was, how measured each answer felt. "We'll need to ask you a few routine questions," he said, "and we'll probably come back later today." "Of course," Rowan said. "Whatever helps." The officers exchanged another glance, then turned toward the door. As they stepped outside, the older one paused as if something had just occurred to him. "One more thing, Mr. Hale," he said, looking back over his shoulder. "Our records show the locks on this house were changed yesterday afternoon." Rowan's expression did not shift, not noticeably. "Yes," he said evenly. "I felt it was time." The officer held his gaze for a moment longer than comfortable, then nodded slowly. "Good night, Mr. Hale." Rowan closed the door and locked it with deliberate care. He stood there in the silence, listening as the patrol car pulled away. Only then did he allow himself to exhale. Upstairs, Myra's side of the bed remained untouched. The silence settled back into the house, heavier now, charged with meaning. He walked to the kitchen, rinsed a glass that hadn't been used, and set it upside down, aligning it carefully, as if order might keep secrets from spilling out. Rowan glanced at the clock again. 2:21 a.m. right on time. Morning arrived without ceremony. Rowan Hale sat alone at the kitchen table, the house still smelling faintly of rain and metal from the night before. The police questions echoed in his head, not as fear, but as confirmation. Everything had begun exactly where he expected. He remembered when observation first replaced affection. In the early years of marriage, Rowan had tried to be attentive, present, generous in ways that could be measured. Myra Calder had responded with warmth, then distance, then carefully rationed honesty. Love did not vanish suddenly. It eroded through patterns Rowan noticed long before he admitted them. Myra was beautiful in a way that attracted attention she pretended not to notice. She spoke softly, laughed easily, and mastered the art of appearing transparent while remaining unreachable. Rowan learned her habits the way others learned prayer. He memorized how long she lingered in doorways, how she adjusted her voice on certain calls, how her smile sharpened when she was hiding something. The first red flag was not an affair, but timing. Myra began returning home minutes later than usual, always with reasonable explanations. Traffic, a friend in distress, a wrong turn, Rowan never argued. He listened, nodded, and logged the details away. Consistency, he knew, revealed more than confession. He installed nothing at first. No trackers, no cameras, only attention. He noticed receipts that did not match stories, moods that shifted without cause, and silences that stretched longer than arguments ever did. When Rowan asked gentle questions, Myra accused him of imagining things. When he stopped asking, she relaxed. Their marriage settled into quiet surveillance. Rowan cooked. Myra smiled. They shared meals that felt rehearsed, conversations trimmed of risk. At night, she turned away from him, scrolling through her phone with the brightness dimmed. Rowan never asked who she was texting. He already understood that secrecy mattered more than the content. Control was never his goal, at least not consciously. Rowan believed knowledge was protection. If he knew Myra well enough, he could anticipate loss before it arrived. That belief hardened when he discovered her first lie he could prove, small and unnecessary, spoken without guilt. From that moment, love became data. Rowan began documenting patterns in his head, then on paper, dates, times, emotional shifts. Myra noticed his distance and interpreted it as disinterest, not awareness. She started guarding her phone, carrying it even into the shower, wrapping it in a towel like something fragile. The night before she disappeared, Myra kissed him absently and reached for a cereal box on the counter. Rowan watched without reacting as she poured herself a bowl, her hands trembling slightly. When she left the kitchen, he checked the box. Taped to the inside flap was a small, unfamiliar phone. Rowan did not touch it immediately. He studied the cheap plastic casing, the faint scratches along its edge, the deliberate choice to hide it somewhere ordinary. Myra had always underestimated how closely he looked. He slid the box back into place and returned to the table, finishing his coffee as if nothing had changed. Only later, when the house was silent again, did he retrieve the phone. It had no contacts saved, no photos, no messages. Just a single call log, wiped clean except for one outgoing number, dialed repeatedly at irregular hours. Rowan copied it down by hand, careful, precise. He understood then that observation alone would no longer be enough. Whoever lived on the other end of that number had been invited into his marriage, and Rowan intended to learn why. He placed the phone back where it belonged, closed the cabinet, and turned off the light, already listening for a voice he had not yet heard. He did not know the man's name, but he knew the sound of betrayal would come through that line, sooner than Myra expected, and when it did, Rowan would be ready. Now Rowan waited until the following night before turning the phone on, sitting alone in the darkened living room as if the walls themselves might listen. The screen flickered weakly, revealing nothing but the time and a low battery warning. He scrolled through the call history again, memorizing the lone number. When he pressed dial, the sound felt too loud, each ring stretching his nerves thinner. On the fourth ring, someone answered. There was no greeting, only breathing, slow and deliberate. Rowan said nothing. Silence, he knew, often forced people to reveal themselves before fear had any chance to speak first. The voice finally broke the quiet, calm and practiced, asking if Myra was alone. Rowan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. He imagined the man leaning somewhere comfortable, unaware of being studied. Rowan answered by lowering his breath, mimicking absence. The voice continued, reassuring, intimate, speaking of plans delayed and promises kept. Myra's name sounded different when spoken by someone else, weighted with familiarity Rowan had not earned lately. He ended the call abruptly, heart steady, mind racing. Now the threat had a tone, not just a number. It lingered long after the screen went dark inside his thoughts. Rowan did not confront Myra the next morning. Instead, he observed her with renewed precision, noting how her shoulders tightened when her phone buzzed, how she avoided meeting his eyes. Myra spoke cheerfully about errands, about trivial plans, never mentioning the call. Rowan mirrored her ease, playing his role flawlessly. He believed confrontation destroyed patterns, and patterns were what revealed truth. Later, while she showered, he replayed the voice in his head, isolating its rhythm, its confidence. Whoever the man was, he believed himself untouchable. That belief would become a weakness. Rowan understood arrogance always left a trail behind eventually. By evening, Rowan had begun recording the calls, documenting times and pauses, building a profile from sound alone. The man never used names, never asked questions that mattered. He spoke like someone used to control, offering comfort wrapped in command. Myra listened more than she spoke, her voice smaller, uncertain. Rowan felt anger then, sharp but contained. This was not romance, it was influence. The man was guiding her decisions, shaping fear into dependence. Rowan realized the trap could not be rushed. Patience, he reminded himself, was the most convincing disguise. Every step required silence, misdirection, and restraint, careful planning. Rowan tested boundaries subtly, altering routines, leaving doors unlocked, watching reactions. Myra noticed changes but misread their purpose. She believed distance meant freedom. Rowan encouraged that belief, withdrawing further, allowing her confidence to grow. Meanwhile, the calls continued, growing bolder. The man spoke of meetings soon, of endings and beginnings. Rowan marked the date mentioned, circled it twice. He understood now that the trap was not meant for Myra alone. It was designed to draw the voice into the open, where sound would become shape, and shape would become identity. Everything depended on timing, and timing was Rowan's strength alone. Late that night, Rowan listened to the final call before sleep. The man promised Myra safety, escape, certainty. Rowan finally spoke softly, asking a single question about trust. The line went quiet, then laughter followed, amused and dismissive. The man believed himself unseen. Rowan ended the call and powered the phone down, satisfied. He no longer wondered if betrayal existed. He was measuring its depth. As he lay awake, Rowan understood the voice had revealed enough. The next step would require more than listening. It would require setting the trap. And once set, it would catch far more than intended. Rowan slept poorly after the call, waking with the certainty that listening alone would no longer suffice. The voice had weight now, direction. By mid-morning, Myra announced an appointment she hadn't mentioned before, said lightly, as if it were nothing. "Therapy," she added, already reaching for her keys. Rowan nodded, filing the word away. He followed at a distance, careful not to be seen, stopping across the street from a low building with frosted windows and a discreet brass plaque. Inside, Tamsin Reeve arranged her notes with practiced calm. She had learned to read silences as much as speech, and Myra arrived carrying both. The session unfolded in fragments: anxiety, pressure, a sense of being watched. Myra spoke of a man who promised safety and another who measured everything. Tamsin asked questions that edged closer than Myra liked, questions about control and consent, about fear disguised as care. Rowan waited in his car, counting minutes, imagining words. When Myra emerged, her face was tight, eyes rimmed red. She avoided his gaze when she returned home, retreating to the bedroom without explanation. That night, Rowan replayed the recorded calls, aligning them against Myra's pauses, her breath. Patterns overlapped. He needed another angle. Tamsin sensed it first. The following week, Myra arrived guarded, answers clipped. When Tamsin pressed, Myra flinched, then apologized, blaming exhaustion. Tamsin noted inconsistencies, the rehearsed quality of relief. She had seen manipulation before, had testified about it once years ago. Curiosity turned into concern. After the session, Tamsin checked her email. An anonymous message waited, subjectless. Inside was a single sentence: "You should listen more carefully." Attached were transcripts, verbatim excerpts from Myra's calls, time-stamped, precise. Tamsin's pulse quickened. Confidentiality had been breached, but the content suggested something worse: surveillance. She printed the pages, locked them away, and resolved to speak carefully next time. Rowan observed the shift immediately. Myra returned unsettled, pacing, asking if he'd touched her things. He denied it gently, convincingly. The calls continued, but now Myra whispered, asked questions. The voice reassured her, warned her about therapists who pried. Rowan recognized deflection. He adjusted, leaving subtle traces meant to unsettle only one person. Tamsin asked too much during the next session, gently naming dynamics Myra tried to avoid. She spoke of power, of how protection can become a leash. Myra cried then, the sound raw, unplanned. She admitted fear without naming its source. Tamsin suggested safety planning, documentation. Myra hesitated, then shook her head. "He's watching," she said, and went still. That evening, Tamsin received another email. This one included her own schedule, copied from a calendar she kept private. The message was brief: "Stay in your lane." Tamsin understood the warning and the test. She drafted a note to a colleague, encrypting details, and decided to keep seeing Myra while tightening her own defenses. Rowan listened to a call that night where the voice urged Myra to stop therapy. Rowan smiled faintly. Pressure was building from all sides, exactly as planned. The trap required a catalyst, someone who would push back. As Myra slept, Rowan placed the burner phone where she would find it missing in the morning. When she noticed, panic would drive her outward, and outward was where the net waited. He considered Tamsin's resilience, the professional calm that masked risk-taking, and adjusted again. He would not threaten her directly. Pressure worked best through absence and implication. Myra would feel alone, misled by reassurance, nudged toward the meeting promised on the calls. Rowan washed the mug he hadn't used, dried it, set it straight. Control, he reminded himself, was not force but sequence. Tomorrow, Myra would seek answers beyond the house. Someone would intervene, and when they did, the observation phase would end. The next step would belong to someone trained to ask questions, and those questions would pull the wrong man closer than he realized before the city noticed everything. Rowan Hale knew patience was a weapon. He spent the morning moving through the house with deliberate calm, adjusting lights, leaving notes in places Myra would see, subtle enough to suggest forgetfulness rather than calculation. The burner phone sat on the kitchen counter, a small, silent invitation. Every step, every object was a signal meant for one pair of eyes, Myra's, and for the voice that haunted the line. Rowan observed, noting her patterns, her reactions, and how easily they could be misread. The trap required precision, and he was meticulous. By mid-afternoon, he contacted Jonah Pike, a private surveillance technician who had never met Rowan outside of formal correspondence. Jonah was young, resourceful, and above all discreet. Rowan outlined a project framed as a routine security upgrade. Cameras, motion detectors, encrypted recordings. He left out the part where the upgrade would capture someone else, someone unseen, someone who thought control was their own. Jonah accepted the job, eager to prove skill in monitoring, unaware that Rowan's interest lay not in ordinary threats, but in the hidden threads of deception weaving through his own home. Myra remained unaware of the preparations. She moved with habitual grace, fetching tea, tidying the living room, occasionally glancing at the phone, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Rowan never spoke of the calls. Instead, he left subtle cues. An open book near the phone, a pen poised atop a pad of paper, an impression that someone had been noting small details. Every element built tension, without revealing its purpose. Observation, Rowan reminded himself, created compliance faster than confrontation ever could. As the afternoon light waned, Rowan tested the traps he had set. He left the front door unlocked briefly, observing through a window as shadows shifted outside. He recorded ambient noises, placing hidden microphones that captured footsteps and whispers alike. The house became a stage, every sound a line in a script only he understood. Jonah installed cameras, their lenses pointed with clinical precision, framing thresholds, hallways, the small staircase Myra used to go to the kitchen. Everything converged on the same point: timing, alignment, and the voice that had infiltrated their marriage. Rowan reflected on the patterns he had documented over months. Myra's hesitations, her glances, her subtle expressions when speaking to the phone. The voice had become more assertive, pressing her toward choices she would not have made alone. Rowan did not fear confrontation, he feared haste. If the trap was sprung prematurely, the wrong person might suffer. He wanted control over the situation so completely that even the voice, confident and detached, would stumble. Evening arrived, and Myra prepared for a walk she said she needed, ostensibly to clear her mind. Rowan's heart did not race. It remained steady, a slow metronome of calculation. He knew where she was going, what she expected, and who would meet her there. The trap was no longer hypothetical. It existed in 3 dimensions, physical and psychological. Every precaution, every camera, every microphone was in place. He had constructed not a prison, but a lure. One wrong step would reveal the truth to everyone, and the voice would finally appear. Jonah left after final adjustments, unaware of the broader orchestration. Rowan locked the house behind him, then retreated to his hidden vantage point across the street. He observed Myra disappear down the sidewalk, her posture tentative, glances over her shoulder. The burner phone lay quietly on the kitchen counter, its presence forgotten yet essential. The trap was now set. Rowan inhaled slowly. He knew what would come next. A confrontation between intention and action, between the hidden and the revealed. The voice on the line had unknowingly been drawn into his design, and he could almost hear the tension tightening around it. The evening sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on, casting long, wavering shadows. The first step had been taken, and as Myra's figure disappeared into the distance, Rowan understood something he had not anticipated. The trap would catch more than he expected. Rowan Hale sat in the dim glow of his surveillance monitor, watching Myra's figure fade into the distance. The trap was no longer abstract. It existed in motion, in choices made under pressure, and in reactions to unseen forces. He had imagined the worst, but now a deeper truth began to surface. What Myra had hidden was more complex than an affair, more layered than a simple betrayal. Forbidden didn't always mean romantic. Rowan realized that for the first time, he was dealing with consequences that no calculation could fully contain. The calls continued, each one carefully scripted by the voice at the other end. It was not affection, not desire, it was influence. Commands wrapped in comfort, reassurances laced with warnings, and an undercurrent of fear. The man, Saurin Vale, as Rowan eventually learned from scattered documents Myra had left behind, was precise, calculating, and aware. His hold over Myra was transactional, born of leverage rather than love. Rowan observed how she responded. Compliance, hesitation, small acts of rebellion, the subtle way her shoulders stiffened when he spoke, the way her lips quivered when she repeated his words aloud. Rowan realized the danger had multiple layers. Myra's secrecy was not born of passion alone, it was survival. Saurin's influence over her had roots in events that predated their marriage, experiences Rowan had never known. The more he watched, the clearer it became that Myra's movements, her choices, even her silences, were dictated by a threat he had not anticipated. This understanding deepened Rowan's strategy. The trap could no longer focus solely on exposing her secret. It had to expose Saurin himself, to uncover the power that had silently dominated her life for years. That night, Myra arrived home late, her face pale, her hands clutching the burner phone as though it were a talisman. She did not look at Rowan. Instead, she placed the phone on the counter, paused, and spoke quietly, almost to herself. He said I should leave it behind. He said he'd be watching. Rowan's heart remained calm, but his mind raced. Every word confirmed the pattern he had been tracking for months. He recognized the tension in her voice, the trace of panic, and the faint hope that someone, somewhere, would intervene. Rowan approached cautiously, maintaining the facade of casual concern. Who? He asked softly, letting the question linger. Myra hesitated, then shook her head, muttering, "It doesn't matter, you wouldn't understand." Rowan nodded. Understanding was irrelevant, observation was enough. He already had the information he needed. He simply needed to wait. In the quiet of the house, Rowan pieced together the emerging picture. Saurin Vale was not a lover, but a manipulator, a predator using knowledge, influence, and fear to control Myra. He had created a network of small dependencies, subtle threats, and promises of safety, and she had followed willingly, out of necessity rather than choice. Rowan recognized the same psychological patterns he had studied in previous cases. Control disguised as protection, influence masquerading as concern, and trust exploited as leverage. By early morning, Rowan had cataloged every interaction, every hesitation, and every deviation from routine. He reviewed the calls again, noting the subtle commands and implied consequences embedded in Saurin's words. It became clear. The trap could not simply expose a lie, it needed to reveal the structure of coercion, the architecture of influence that had bound Myra for months. This realization shifted his plan. Observation alone would no longer suffice. Action would be necessary. As the sun rose, Myra slept fitfully, exhausted by fear and tension. Rowan watched from the doorway, his expression neutral, but his mind alive with calculations. The trap was not just about discovery anymore. It was about justice in its most measured form. Saurin Vale had assumed power through secrecy. Rowan intended to return it in full, exposing the forbidden manipulation that had been mistaken for love. And in that silence, Rowan understood the paradox that would guide the next phase. Sometimes, what is forbidden is not romantic at all. It is dangerous. And danger, when confronted methodically, can be baited, caught, and revealed to those who least expect it. The trap, he knew, was only beginning. The night air was thick and cold, pressing against Myra Calder as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She carried the burner phone tightly in her hand, the weight of it heavier than its plastic casing. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like wet glass. Every street lamp cast pools of light, punctuating the darkness with intervals of clarity and shadow. Myra walked quickly, her steps deliberate, scanning the empty roads. She believed she was in control. She believed the path she had chosen would lead her somewhere safe. Rowan Hale, watching from his hidden vantage across the street, knew differently. Rowan's surveillance cameras recorded her every movement, capturing angles he had tested earlier that week. Jonah Pike had ensured nothing was missed. The narrow alleyways, the lamplight reflections, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The trap was set in 3 dimensions: sound, light, and human expectation. Rowan's eyes followed Myra as she approached the small coffee shop at the corner of the block, a place she had claimed held the answer to her next move. But the truth was more insidious. Saurin Vale was waiting, Not inside, not yet, but close enough to intersect with her path when she least expected it. Myra paused briefly to check the phone. One missed call. Another came through immediately after from the same unknown number. The voice, calm and commanding, spoke of a meeting, a place where all secrets could be laid bare. Myra's pulse quickened. She glanced over her shoulder, thinking perhaps she imagined shadows moving in the distance. She did not see Rowan, crouched behind a parked car, notepad in hand, noting the rhythm of her breathing, the small tremors in her fingers. He understood her fear without a word. He had studied it for months. As Myra turned the corner toward the alley she had been directed to, Rowan's mind raced through contingencies. He had anticipated hesitation, sudden change in direction, even attempts to flee. Everything she did was within the parameters he had established. He checked the monitors again. The alley was empty, silent, yet lined with shadows that seemed to follow her movements. Each step she took brought her closer to the unknown, closer to Saurin, closer to the revelation Rowan had orchestrated. Myra's mind was a storm of fear and hope. She whispered to herself, "This is the way out. He promised me safety." The promise felt fragile, unreal. The rain from earlier clung to her hair, her coat, forming droplets that glimmered in the dim light. Every sound, distant footsteps, the hum of an air vent, the creak of a loose sign, felt amplified, a warning she could not interpret. Rowan's camera lenses captured it all. The minute details, the way her shadow twisted with every movement, the hesitant sway of her shoulders. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a dumpster. Myra froze, heart hammering. The man's presence was calculated, deliberate, yet she did not recognize him fully. The voice on the phone had led her here, but the reality was more dangerous than any conversation had hinted. Rowan held his breath, noting how Myra's instinctive trust in a voice now intersected with the tangible danger surrounding her. He understood she had entered a psychological labyrinth where perception and reality collided. Myra tried to speak, but no words came. Her hands shook, the phone slipped slightly, and she caught it just in time. The man moved closer, calm, deliberate, almost amused. It was Saurin Vale. For the first time, his physical presence matched the control he had wielded through the line. Fear coursed through her veins, and instinct demanded flight. But the alley's narrow path, the calculated placement of obstacles, and her reliance on the voice created paralysis. She was trapped in a dance designed by Rowan, unknowing and precise. Rowan noted every reaction, every twitch, every thought mirrored on her face. His plan had shifted. The trap was not for Myra alone. It was for the man who believed he had orchestrated control from afar. And in that moment, as Myra took a tentative step forward, Saurin's attention was drawn to a sound behind him, a shadow that did not belong. The trap was set. The stage was ready, and the first act of revelation was about to begin. Myra did not scream, she did not run. She only realized, too late, that leaving the house had placed her squarely within a design she could neither predict nor escape. The night that began with simple uncertainty had turned into a collision of intention and deception, and the consequences would extend far beyond her own fear. Rowan Hale watched the monitors with a cold, measured focus. The alley had emptied after Myra's arrival, leaving shadows and reflections as the only witnesses. Saurin Vale, confident and unknowing, had followed every cue Rowan had orchestrated. But what the trap caught was not Myra, it was him. The man who had believed himself untouchable now moved into the frame of a story he could no longer control. Rowan's cameras tracked his every step, recording each gesture, each flicker of hesitation he could not hide. Saurin approached the coffee shop where he had instructed Myra to meet him. His expression was calm, collected, yet there was a subtle shift in his posture. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough for Rowan to notice. Every predator leaves a trace. Every manipulator betrays themselves under observation. Rowan leaned closer to the screen, noting the rhythm of Saurin's breathing, the way he adjusted his cuff, the microsecond glances over his shoulder. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind Saurin, a shadowed form moving silently across the street. It was Jonah Pike, the surveillance technician, acting on cues Rowan had relayed remotely. Saurin's eyes flicked in that direction, the first hint of awareness breaking his composed facade. For the first time, he hesitated, unsure which threat was immediate and which was imagined. Rowan's heart remained steady. He had set the stage, and now the actors were performing precisely as intended. From the shadows, the police arrived, called earlier by Rowan under the guise of a routine report. Their presence was subtle but undeniable. Saurin, realizing too late that his control had been compromised, began to retreat. Every step he took was recorded, every movement catalogued. Rowan watched with meticulous care, knowing that evidence was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, visual, undeniable. Meanwhile, Myra remained out of sight, hidden behind a corner. She had been instructed through the burner phone to remain in the periphery, to allow the trap to operate without interference. The tension in her chest was suffocating, but Rowan had calculated that her fear would not provoke panic. It would provoke observation. She saw Saurin's sudden faltering, the rigid movement of his hands, the tight clench of his jaw, and understood for the first time the danger that had been woven into her life. Rowan documented everything: Saurin's hesitation, the timing of the police's intervention, Jonah's calculated steps. This was not a rescue, not yet. It was proof. Proof that Saurin had exerted control through coercion and manipulation. Proof that betrayal and secrecy carried consequences. Rowan recognized that the psychological aspect of the trap had succeeded. Saurin had been lured into overconfidence and exposed by his own arrogance. The body of another element emerged in the story. A man previously unseen, bound and hidden, revealed by Saurin's own miscalculation. This secondary victim was evidence of a pattern, a network of influence that had extended beyond Myra. Rowan understood then that what he had caught was far larger than a single act of betrayal. Saurin's crimes were systemic, his control extensive, and his arrogance ultimately fatal to his own freedom. Rowan felt no satisfaction, only clarity. The trap had worked exactly as intended. It had captured the manipulator, exposed the lies, and created a moment where the truth could not be denied. Yet he also understood that the consequences would ripple outward. Lives had been endangered, trust had been violated, and innocence had been placed in the balance. As the police closed in, Saurin's composure shattered completely. Rowan exhaled, knowing that the next chapter would require confrontation, questioning, and the slow unraveling of motives. The trap had caught more than a secret. It had ensnared a man who had thought himself untouchable. And now, the consequences of his arrogance would unfold in full view. The trap was no longer hypothetical. It had a victim, a witness, and a predator. Rowan's work had begun, but the cost of the revelation was only just emerging. Rowan Hale leaned back in the dim glow of his office, the monitors casting pale light across his face. The events of the previous night replayed endlessly in his mind. The way Saurin Vale had faltered, the subtle movements that betrayed arrogance, the fear mirrored in Myra's eyes. He had expected revelation, yes, but not the emotional weight it carried. Knowing the truth did not bring satisfaction. It brought responsibility, and with responsibility came cost. Rowan reviewed the recordings once more, noting the tiny hesitations, the micro-expressions, the split-second reactions. Every movement told a story that words could not capture. Myra had survived, physically unharmed, but the psychological toll was evident even from her distance. She moved through the house with a new wariness, her laughter lighter, forced, as though each smile was a carefully measured act. Rowan realized that she would never again move through life unaware, that her perception of safety had been shattered, and that his orchestration had placed her in harm's way, however controlled the circumstances. The police had begun their interviews. Detective Elio Bran was methodical, asking questions that cut through pretense. Rowan answered carefully, aware that each word could alter the perception of events. He had constructed the trap to expose Saurin, not to implicate himself, but the line between control and culpability blurred. He had withheld information, manipulated timelines, and allowed events to escalate in order to capture a predator. The ethical weight pressed on him, heavier than the satisfaction of proving the truth. Jonah Pike arrived that afternoon, eager to debrief. Rowan watched him enter, noting the technician's nervous energy, the way he kept glancing at the monitors as though expecting another revelation. "Everything was recorded exactly as we planned," Rowan said, voice calm but edged with tension. "Saurin made a mistake. That mistake exposed everything." Jonah nodded, but his brow furrowed. "Are we sure this doesn't cross a line?" Rowan's silence spoke volumes. Control had consequences. Knowledge carried responsibility. The trap had succeeded, but at what cost? Myra retreated into the bedroom, avoiding conversations that might demand explanation or reflection. Rowan observed from the doorway, noting her posture, the subtle tension in her hands as she held the burner phone close. She had begun speaking more cautiously, choosing words that revealed nothing unnecessary. Rowan realized that the psychological impact of observation extended beyond Saurin. Myra's trust in both the world and in him had shifted irreversibly. Knowing the truth was no longer a simple victory. It was a burden they both now carried. As the evening darkened, Rowan reviewed Saurin's arrest footage, the meticulous documentation of his reactions, the precise evidence that confirmed his manipulations. Justice in this sense was clear, but Rowan could not shake the unease that had settled into his chest. Observation had unveiled the predator, but it had also revealed his own limits. Knowing the truth required action, but action carried risk. Every ethical compromise, every calculated delay now weighed upon him. Rowan thought of the network Saurin had created, the subtle coercion and manipulation extending beyond Myra, the secondary victims whose lives had been disrupted or endangered. He understood that exposure came with collateral damage. Knowledge, he realized, was a currency, valuable, powerful, and dangerous in equal measure. The moment of revelation was never without consequence. Night fell fully, and Rowan sat alone, monitors fading to black. He understood now that the trap had not only ensnared Saurin Vale, but had revealed the fragility of trust, the tenuous nature of control, and the moral ambiguity inherent in pursuing truth. Myra's safety had been preserved, but at a cost no one outside the house could comprehend. He had learned that knowing could not be separated from responsibility. And in that quiet, as the shadows stretched across the walls, Rowan realized the truth he had long avoided. Sometimes the cost of knowing is heavier than the danger itself, and the consequences of revelation ripple far beyond the moment they are first seen. The next step, confrontation and accountability, would demand more than observation. It would demand choice. And choice, Rowan knew, would not come without sacrifice. The courthouse was silent, almost reverent, as Rowan Hale stepped inside. Cameras had captured Saurin Vale's every movement, every attempt to conceal evidence, every subtle intimidation of witnesses. The law had the proof, and yet Rowan felt an unsettling weight in the air. Truth, he realized, could be indisputable and yet leave justice incomplete. He had orchestrated the trap, ensured the exposure, but the consequences, emotional, psychological, and moral, were not contained within court walls. Myra sat in the gallery, a small figure surrounded by authority and paperwork. Her face was pale, expression taut. She did not meet Rowan's eyes. She understood what had been done, and she understood what had been prevented. Yet the silence between them carried more meaning than any argument could. Rowan recognized the chasm his methods had created. Observation, calculation, and patience had caught Saurin, but they had also fractured trust. Myra's relief was real, but so was her wariness. Detective Elio Bran recounted the events as they had unfolded. The alley, the missteps, the intervention, and the secondary victims who had been revealed through Saurin's arrogance. The court listened, noting each fact, each timestamp, each meticulously documented proof. But Rowan knew, and the judge's eyes confirmed, that the law could only punish Saurin for what it could prove. It could not erase the months of fear, the psychological manipulation, or the subtle terror that had defined Myra's daily life. Saurin sat across the courtroom, his composure cracking under scrutiny. Every photograph, every recording, every witness statement chipped away at the facade he had maintained for months. He had been a predator, yes, but also a man who believed the boundaries of morality did not apply to him. Rowan observed quietly, noting the exact moment Saurin's confidence collapsed. It was a victory, but a hollow one. After the evidence was laid bare, Rowan found himself alone in a hallway outside the courtroom. Myra approached silently, hesitant. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but clear. "You didn't save me. You tested me." The words struck harder than any threat or manipulation ever could. Rowan's jaw tightened. She was right. The trap had preserved her life, but at the expense of innocence, at the expense of choice. Her safety had been orchestrated through control and observation, not trust or partnership. The trial concluded with Saurin Vale convicted of coercion, intimidation, and multiple counts of psychological abuse. The law would impose sentences, fines, and conditions for restitution, but Rowan understood that this was not the full measure of justice. The secondary victims remained affected, their lives altered. Myra's sense of security had been restored, but it would never return to its previous state. Truth had been revealed, but justice, whole, satisfying, morally unambiguous justice, was still incomplete. Rowan walked Myra to the car, keeping a careful distance. She stared out the window, silent, while he reflected on the months of planning, observation, and manipulation. Every step had been precise, every choice deliberate, but the cost was tangible. He had ensured Saurin's exposure, yes, but he had also exposed the fragility of trust, the dangers of control, and the complexity of morality when survival is at stake. That night, Rowan returned home to the monitors, now silent, the screens dark. The trap had worked, the predator had fallen, and yet the weight of consequences lingered. He realized the hardest truth. Exposing lies and coercion does not always restore balance, does not heal trauma, and does not erase the moral ambiguities of the path taken. The law could punish Saurin, but it could not restore innocence. Rowan understood, finally, that the trap had revealed far more than he intended. Not only Saurin's crimes, but also the cost of meticulous observation, the consequences of patience turned to action, and the moral toll of playing judge outside the law. He sat in silence, the courtroom fading in memory, the city quiet outside, realizing that truth, though revealed, was not the same as justice. Myra would survive, Saurin would pay, but Rowan knew some lessons were beyond the courtroom. Some truths demanded recognition beyond legal verdicts, and in that recognition lay the weight they all had to carry, a burden heavier than the trap itself. The aftermath of Saurin Vale's conviction settled over Rowan Hale like a cold, heavy fog. The city moved on, traffic surged through familiar streets, and life resumed its ordinary rhythms, but the consequences of the trap lingered in every corner of his mind. Myra Calder, finally free from Saurin's manipulations, walked through her apartment cautiously, the shadows of fear still clinging to her movements. Rowan watched from a distance, realizing that freedom was not the same as peace, and truth was not the same as healing. Myra approached him one evening, hesitant, carrying the burner phone that had become both a tool and a symbol of her ordeal. "You caught him," she said softly. "But at what cost?" Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from the weight of understanding. Rowan remained silent for a moment, letting her words settle. He had orchestrated the trap, captured the manipulator, and ensured evidence that could not be denied. But the lesson it revealed was heavier than any victory. Rowan finally spoke, his voice measured but tinged with honesty. "The cost of knowing is always higher than you imagine. Truth can save you, but it can also hurt you. Observation, patience, strategy, they can uncover lies, but they can't erase the fear, the doubt, or the pain left behind." Myra nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. For months, she had been controlled by someone who used trust as leverage. Now, she understood that freedom, like truth, required responsibility and resilience to carry its weight. Jonah Pike, the technician who had helped orchestrate the trap, returned one afternoon to finalize the surveillance archive. He moved quietly through the house, packing equipment, and glanced at Rowan. "I've worked on a lot of cases," he said, "but this isn't just evidence, it's a lesson in human behavior, and it's heavy." Rowan acknowledged the statement with a subtle nod. The work had revealed more than Saurin's crimes. It had revealed the fragile boundaries of trust, the consequences of manipulation, and the dangerous allure of control. Myra began to reclaim parts of her life cautiously, choosing small acts of independence. Rowan observed her not as a manipulator now, but as a guardian of her own autonomy. He understood that trust had to be rebuilt slowly, that freedom was not a moment, but a process. Every smile she forced, every cautious decision, was a testament to resilience, and Rowan recognized that true vigilance meant knowing when to step back. The lesson Rowan carried most keenly, however, was personal. Observation and patience, while effective in revealing truth, demanded moral clarity and restraint. The trap had worked, but it had also tested his own ethics, his own boundaries. He realized that knowledge without responsibility could easily become a weapon rather than a shield. The ability to uncover secrets was powerful, but it also carried the danger of corruption. As the sun set, Rowan walked through the quiet streets of the city, reflecting on the months of planning, deception, and revelation. Myra's freedom had been secured, Saurin had faced consequences, but the human cost, the emotional scars, the fragility of trust, the weight of knowing, remained. He understood that some lessons were unavoidable, that some truths demanded confrontation, and that some consequences could never be fully measured. Rowan returned home, locking the doors carefully, as he had done so many times before. But now the silence was different. It was not a prelude to observation or control. It was a moment of reflection, a recognition of limits, and a quiet acknowledgement that human behavior, no matter how studied, could not always be contained. He whispered to himself, almost as a warning to anyone who would follow a similar path. Truth can protect, but it can also destroy. Knowledge comes with a cost, and justice is rarely simple. Myra, from her bedroom, listened without responding. The lesson was no longer theoretical. It was lived, remembered, and carried forward, a truth no one had wanted, but one they could not escape. Betrayal, manipulation, and secrets can hide in the most familiar places. The truth may reveal the liar, the manipulator, or the predator, but it also exposes the cost of knowing, fear, doubt, and broken trust. Survival doesn't mean innocence is restored and justice isn't always complete. Sometimes, the hardest lesson is realizing that seeing the truth is only the first step, and living with it is what truly tests us. This video was created as a fictional story for entertainment and awareness purposes. Thank you for watching. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case-style videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay alert.